Okay, so I have myself a Tippmann MK5 kit. Now this is made by Rap4. It's a magazine-fed kit. I love mag-fed, so I went with this. This is for the A5. I will be switching the magwell though. This comes with the standard magwell. The DMag magwell has not been released yet. That comes out in June. But as soon as the DMag well is released, I'll be switching to that. Because for this project, I'm actually going to try to be making a G3 style rifle. And with the G3 rifle, it has a nice little paddle release for the magazines. And that's what the DMag magwell is actually going to be released with as well. Currently, this magwell has a release. It's a little push button. It's kind of hard if you're shooting a gun. You can't reach that button with your finger. You have to pretty much take your hand off the trigger to be able to get to the push button release. So I just generally don't really care for this magwell that much. We got our A5 kit here. First thing I'm going to start on for this video is the stock. I'll just work from the back to the front probably for this project. The foregrip's going to be the hardest, so I'll probably just save that for last. Now I bought myself a JG airsoft G3 rifle. I took the stock off, just pulled the pins. Have this piece here. I took out two screws that are inside here that hold this metal piece on. I didn't really want this metal piece. You could if you wanted to be able to attach it. It just makes it kind of long. Also seems to add a bit of extra space here. So in order to have it flush, I actually unscrewed this metal piece. I'm going to take that, I'm going to discard that piece, and I'm just going to use just the plastic here. Plastic's generally a little bit easier to work with it as well, rather than the metal piece. So I'm going to be using this plastic piece, and I'm going to pretty much epoxy that onto the end cap of the A5 here. So just got the standard A5 end cap that it came with. I'm going to be able to epoxy that pretty much right into the stock there. And when it's done, it'll be really solid, really sturdy. The epoxy I like to use is JB Weld. It comes in the packaging like this. It's a two-part epoxy. You got a hardener and a resin. You mix these together. Once they mix up, it's like a goo liquid. But once it sets, it's extremely hard, extremely difficult to break. The plastic stock itself would probably break before that joint will. So we're going to be using that for today. Also, I may be using this type of epoxy here. It's just like a stick. I don't have an actual packaging. This one's partly used, but it's also a two-part epoxy. There's the blue part and then the white part in there. If you can see, this epoxy works pretty well. This is like a putty, epoxy putty. I just bought this in the like a plumbing section of the hardware store. Walmart sells it, that kind of stuff. It's pretty easy to come by. This works really well for a little bit thicker, where the JB Weld is a lot thinner. I use both just because when I use the thicker stuff, it sets a lot quicker too. This sets in like 5 minutes, where the JB Weld sets in 24 hours. The thicker stuff I'll use to actually mount the piece in there first, and this will set quicker, and then I'll also reinforce it and have the main hold with this JB Weld. So that's the plan. Now, after I remove this piece, I'm gonna have to cut this plastic off here. This where the metal attached to, in order to be able to fit this down in there and make it look nice and clean and flush. This doesn't look very appealing with this extra plastic there. So the first thing I want to do is cut that off. I just get a Dremel tool and a cut-off wheel here. I'm just going to turn it on and cut that plastic off. Just cuts right through. And take your time with this sort of thing. You don't want to get in a hurry and mess anything up, but... Okay. So now that I've finished cutting this plastic piece off, we don't really need this. This is trash. We can just discard that. Clean up some of this. Looks a little bit more flush, a little bit cleaner when it goes up against there. Now, I'm going to leave this piece on here, but see, this is inhibiting. There's a little bar in there, kind of a support bar, goes across. Now, since it won't go in the whole way, I got two choices. I can either cut this support bar out so that this fits in, or I could trim this back piece. Now, I want to remove little material as possible at this point, because I do want as much of this material in there for support and to be able to hold things. Probably just going to go with cutting this piece. So I'm just going to trim just the bottom part of this. Same deal with cut-off wheel. And this plastic's a bit harder to cut just because it's the nylon. It's reinforced nylon. This is more of like a weapons grade plastic, but it does trim off fairly easily. Much easier than metal or anything like that. So now I'm going for the bottom portion. Looks like I need to make the hole a little bit bigger. And you just want to kind of pull away this little excess plastic. Kind of melts up and comes off there, but I should be able to slide that in there then. There we go. It's pretty good. It's starting to get there. As you can see, there's a little bit of a gap still here. It's because this top is hitting up against there. So we can just go ahead and trim that some. Actually, for that, I'm going to switch to the sanding wheel here. Just try to sand away some of that plastic. It's up at the top. Just sand that away a little bit. There we go, it fits nice and flush. Next we'll be gluing the thing onto the back end of the stock. Okay, so the next thing I did here, this back end comes off. I pulled this back end off. To make it a little bit easier, I took some tape here. This is just some duct tape. And I shoved it down in this bottom here. Now this is just basically to provide like as a dam here to keep the epoxy from running the whole way back down into the stock. So I can pull it up here and get a nice pull of epoxy to be able to mount this back end cap in onto the back of the stock. And in order to do that, I jammed some tape down in there. I was having a little harder time. So that's why I took the back off, and I used one of my rulers and just kind of stuck it through the back as a tool to kind of hold it in there while I push the tape in at a certain depth so that I can fill this rest with epoxy and get that cleared up. So this particular stock just clicks on like that, the back end. Put that back on. We'll just be mounting this on there shortly then. I'll be mixing up some epoxy, be filling that up, and I'll show you how I do the mount on this to keep everything lined up and straight. That's why we're going to use the faster epoxy along with the air epoxy, just because the faster epoxy will help me get it lined up initially and get everything set, and then it won't move, so that way it gives the time for the other epoxy to final set and get everything on there nice and hard. Okay, so now we're going to start doing our epoxy. I've already dumped in some epoxy into the back of the stock, as you can see here. I've actually used a couple different types. I used the JB Weld. I didn't want to waste too much JB Weld, so I had some plastic epoxy sitting around as well. I filled the back end with that, and some Jimmy Weld. There's multiple types. Plus I got this epoxy putty. I know I go a little crazy with epoxy, but it'll be all worth it here in the end because it'll be nice and sturdy and set. This epoxy putty is pretty awesome stuff here. You can just kind of mix it together just by kneading it. Like it's like Play-Doh. Get this mixed up. Now the plastic epoxy I dumped in there is a 5-minute epoxy, so you gotta be kind of quick. I'm gonna go ahead and shove some epoxy through this back end of this piece here like that. Get it kind of set like that. Forgot I gotta make room for that back end piece there. Hopefully this will work correctly. Kind of just spread it out a bit. This stuff sets fairly quickly, so you be semi-quick about it. Press it in there. Probably just fill in the rest of the gaps in a little bit here. You want to keep a rag around, it gets messy working with this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and fit it to the back of the A5 here to make sure everything's lined up. Looks like everything's pretty good. Just the way I like it. I'll flip it back upside down. Pull it back off. Just going to line everything up. You can use the grooves in the plastic. You can see where they're kind of put together as well. You kind of just visually line that up on the top and bottom here. Make sure there's no alright. It's looking pretty good. You gotta kind of work a little bit fast with this stuff before it hardens up. Wants to position itself. Probably go ahead, once it's the main glue hardens here, I'm going to actually flip it back this way to try to get the glue to settle down toward the end cap end. That way it's, you can already see it starting to come out a little bit there. That way it glues itself thoroughly to this piece. Now this putty will be setting here fairly quickly, so it'll be pretty hard in a minute. But yeah, that's pretty much all that's going to be done. I'm probably going to take some tape or something and cover these holes here so it doesn't leak out, and flip this upside down to try to get the glue to set there. I'm going to kind of keep an eye on it, make sure it's not leaking. You don't want the epoxy all over this end cap here, especially the internals. Otherwise you just have to sand that stuff away later. So I actually did something a little bit different. I know I had mentioned that I was going to do tape, but I actually just used some epoxy putty and filled in the gaps all around the sides here to try to get rid of any holes there. That way the epoxy, the liquid epoxy, won't leak out. This stuff is nice and hard, it hardens up pretty quickly, and it's nice and sticky, so it stays on there. So as you can see, my hands are a mess. You might want to use gloves, but once this hardens up, it'll be good to go. It'll actually hold this adapter in place. It's actually pretty hard right now. Once this is hardened up, feel confident, go ahead and invert this, and we'll just let this sit like this upside down overnight, and all the epoxy will kind of run down toward the end and harden up. And once that's hardened up, that thing should be mounted on there pretty good. Afterwards, since I put this around, it might have a little harder time fitting on. I might have to sand this epoxy off after everything hardens up. So, but we'll take care of that tomorrow. That's pretty much it for today for the stock. I'll go in part 2 and show you how I sand this off, and we'll probably do some other things to modify. This bottom lip's gonna not be quite flush with this curve here, so we'll probably sand that off, and we'll get everything cleaned up and paint it up and have it look good. That'll be pretty much it for the stock. Alright, I'll see you guys in part 2.